Hello, hello. Welcome. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this edition of the Notion at Work webcast. I am William Nutt of Nutt Labs. We're an integrated digital strategy firm and Notion consultancy. And I also run the independent website Notion VIP, where I publish tools and insights about all things Notion. You can access that at notion.vip, and you can find me on Twitter at William Nutt. It's so nice to see some familiar faces in here. So, as many of you know, the ability to relate databases is among the most useful features of Notion. If you're familiar with my bulletproof methodology, you know that my core tenet is to centralize information within related master databases and then create contextual dashboards for accessing that information. And so the Rollup property is kind of an extension of the relation property. It empowers it in a way. It allows you to automatically populate information and aggregate information and perform calculations on information from related items. So today I'm going to kind of demonstrate the utility of the Rollup property through a few practical examples. And for your reference, as you practice with the Rollup property, you can access those sample databases as a template on Notion VIP. So I will link to that within the recording of this presentation and the other follow-up resources. And I'm going to walk through these demonstrations and then take questions at the end. So if your questions pop up along the way, you can submit them using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of Crowdcast. And if you're tuning in from YouTube, you can pop over to Crowdcast using the link within the description. So it's just me today, so I'll check in occasionally into the chat to see if anybody's raising any sounding any alarms about any technical difficulties, but hopefully I am visible and audible. So I will expand my screen here and jump into it. So what is the Rollup property? Well, as I said, the Rollup property is used in conjunction with the relation property. So when an item in one database relates to one or more items in another database, it can kind of roll up or retrieve other properties for its related items. And then with that information that it retrieves, it can just display that information as a list, or it can modify it in various ways. And in the case of numbers, it can actually perform calculations on those values to return really valuable insights and summaries. So in this example here, we see a database of companies and we see a database of people. And every person in this people database is related to a company. So you can think of them as kind of employees. We only have 3 companies here, but then we have multiple employees per company. And within our people database, we have a multi-select property for the languages that the people speak. And so using this Rollup property, we can pull in or retrieve all of the languages that are spoken by each company's employees. And rather than, if multiple employees speak the same language, rather than displaying that language multiple times, we have the ability to display it only once. We can display unique values, which is really a new feature of Notion. So we can see kind of the Rollup property evolving over time and becoming even more useful. But when you configure a Rollup property, you're going to specify 3 settings. So the relation is going to be the relation property for which you want to retrieve information. In this case, we want to retrieve people for the related people, or we want to retrieve information for the related people. And then the property setting is going to be the property for the related items that you want to retrieve. So in this case, we are retrieving the languages for the related people. And then the calculation setting is where we specify what we want to do with the retrieved information. So in this case, as I explained, we're just displaying the unique values for all of the retrieved languages. But we could have just displayed the original values, which would have included duplicates of the same language. And in the case of numbers, like I said, we actually have the ability to perform calculations. So we'll take a look at some examples of each. So continuing with our people and companies examples, let's take a look at how we could automatically categorize people. So here we're seeing a few different properties of these same databases. For each company, you can see that we've specified a category. We have this select property for the category, and each company can be a vendor, a client, or a partner, and we have one of each here. So, of course, for each company, we have multiple people. And in many cases, you're going to want to categorize your companies and your people the same way. So rather than manually selecting the category for each person, we can use a rollup property to retrieve the category of the person's employer, the person's company, so that we can keep our information really consistent and accurate, and we can eliminate redundancy in our work. So this rollup property here, you can see our three different settings. For the relation, we've chosen the company because we want to retrieve information from the related company for each person. And that information we want to retrieve is the category of the company. And then because we have just one company and one category per company, we don't need to worry about duplicates. So we can just opt to show the original value. And therefore, the category is going to populate automatically for each person based on the person's company. And so then we could filter these people or sort these people or group on a board, all according to category without having to specify the category manually. So just inheriting information from related items is a really useful implementation of rollup properties. Let's look at another one, this case using numbers in a calculation. And before I do so, I'm going to take a quick peek at the chat. No alarms are sounding. Let's keep at it. So in this instance, each person is assigned an age. This is just a number property. Now, we could have used, in a conventional people database, oftentimes we will include the birthday of the person. And if it includes the year, then we could calculate age using a formula. But in this case, we are just entering the age as a number for the sake of demonstration. So each person has an age. And of course, each person is related to a company. So because each company is related to multiple people, we can use a rollup property to retrieve all of the ages for the related people, or in this case, the employees of the company. And when we do that, we can average those ages. So of course, our relation is still going to be the people relation, and the property that we want to retrieve for those related people is their age. And then what we want to do with those ages is average them. And so by averaging them, we just get this single returned number. It's going to be the average of all of the ages of the related people. So this is one look at what we can do when we're working with numbers and rollup properties. So then, now that we're a little bit more oriented with the rollup property, we can take another quick look at this languages example. So I'll just explain it again. For each person, we have assigned one or more languages using a multi-select property. And then this rollup property in companies retrieves all of the languages for the related people. And so you can see this configuration here. Of course, we have our people relationship we want to retrieve the language's contents, and we want to show the unique values rather than showing any language multiple times. So here we are able to see all of the languages represented by each company's employees. So let's move on to an entirely new set of databases as an example. One of the best, most useful purposes of the Rollup property is to summarize information when you're working with numbers. So in a variety of different databases and information types, you can use kind of the granular database, in this case, individual expenses, and then you can use classification databases that kind of group those granular database items. So in this example, we have expense categories that groups our expenses, and then we also have months and years. These are all different sorts of classifications you might want to use to group your expenses, and then use Rollup properties to summarize them. So you can see for each expense here, we've related it to a category, we've related it to a month, and then we're automatically populating the year. And I'll explain how we did that in just a second. But what's most important here is that we're able to calculate the total of all expenses within each classification, in this case, within each category. So the way that we do that is that for our relation property, of course, we want to select the expenses that are related to each category. Because you're choosing a category for each expense, then it's going to have a reciprocal property within the expense categories database. Of course, it's hidden here, but it's going to include all of the categories or all of the expenses for each category. So expenses is our relation. We want to retrieve the total for all of those related expenses. So here's that total property up here. And then what do we want to do with all those totals? We want to add them all together. So we choose sum. And we do the exact same process here within the months database. Every expense is related to one of these months. So if we want to calculate the total for each month, we choose the expenses relation. We retrieve the total for those expenses, and then we add them by selecting sum here. And so, of course, this example does not include expenses within each month, but you can imagine that they would all be populated when we're tracking expenses over time. Now, when you have this sort of three-level hierarchy rather than just a parent-child relationship, when you have kind of like a grandparent-parent-child relationship, as we have with years, months, and then expenses, rather than choosing the parent and grandparent for each of the individual child items, when we choose the parent, in this case, when we choose the month for each expense, because each of those months is associated with a year, then we can use a Rollup to retrieve the year for that expense rather than populating it manually. And again, that's going to keep the information accurate, consistent, and it's going to reduce redundancy. So the reason that we're able to do that is because this month's database is related to the years database. So years are related to months, and months are related to expenses. And therefore, for each expense, we can use the months as kind of a proxy for retrieving the year. And so the way that we do that is in this Rollup property here in expenses, the year property. The month is the relation property, that we want to retrieve information from. And within that month's database, for each month, we want to retrieve the year, which is its own relation property. And we just want to show the original year because there's just one for each month. So that's another really helpful implementation of the Rollup property, is to retrieve information in this kind of multi-level hierarchical relationship. So the last example I want to walk through here is with projects and tasks. So something that's kind of neat about Notion is that when you're rolling up checkboxes. You can choose to display the percentage of checked checkboxes. So in a conventional project task tracking system, a project is basically just going to be comprised of a group of tasks. And when you complete all the tasks, you complete the project. So in Notion, we relate tasks to their project. And that helps us to track it in various ways. So each of these tasks are related to this one project up here. And you can see that a few of them are checked. So this progress property here is a rollup property. And the way that we configure it is by selecting the related tasks as the relation. And then for those tasks, we want to retrieve the complete property. And because the complete property is a checkbox, the calculate setting has the option to display the percent checked. And that's why we're able to see a 66.7% progress for this project, because that is the percentage of checked checkboxes down here. So if we check different number of checkboxes, you can see that progress value changing. So these are really the fundamentals of the rollup property, and there are a variety of nuances to it that you'll certainly encounter as you become familiar with the rollup property and use it in your own workspaces. A lot of times you'll encounter some obstacles, such as, for example, this property that you select here cannot be a roll-up property. So you're almost guaranteed to try to roll up a roll-up in some cases, especially in those kind of multi-level hierarchical relationships. And Notion won't currently allow you to do that, but there are some workarounds, most of which you can figure out on your own through your own tinkering. But if you really get hung up, please feel free to tweet at me, to tweet at William Nutt, and I'll be happy to help you navigate them, because the more familiar you get with these rollups, the more you're going to be able to streamline your system and like I said, keep your information accurate, consistent, reduced redundancy, and streamline your overall workflow. So like I said, all these databases are available as a template on Notion VIP. I will include that in the follow-up resources in the video descriptions. And so with that, I'd love to answer any questions that you may be asking in the Ask a Question feature. So none in there yet. I will look in the chat here. Allison says, "Oh, this can be a great way to track OKRs." Yeah, you're exactly right. So OKRs, you can when you structure objectives and key results as kind of a parent-child relationship, then you're able to track the progress of your key results and your overall objectives by rolling up either the percentage of checkboxes, if that's how you're tracking your key results, or what I like to do is in my key results, what I'll do is I'll have like a target value and a current value. And therefore I can calculate the percentage progress for each key result. And then what a rollup can do is it can average all of those percentages of progress for the related key results to give you an overall progress of your objective. And I think there's another Notion at Work episode dedicated to that specifically. And there's certainly a post on Notion VIP with a template for you to look at exactly how that's done. But that's a great example of how you can utilize rollups to track your objectives and key results. So Leo says, talking about expenses, is there an easy way to compare expenses in the same category from different months? So, easy just kind of depends on your comfort level, Leo. As you start to implement some of these strategies and become familiar with rollups, I think you'll find it pretty easy to compare expenses in the same category from different months. So there are a few different approaches that you could take to that within kind of if you open up each category I still have my screen shared. So this is getting in to a little bit beyond rollups. This is really just more about relations. But if, for example, you wanted to look at all of your office supplies expenses by month, what you could do is within the inner page contents of your expenses, you could include a linked database to the expenses and filter it to show only the expenses that are within the office supplies category. So then you could create different views of those expenses that are filtered by month, or you could actually create multiple instances of that linked database. So you could have like January, February, March, and so forth, so that you could view all of the expenses by month within this specific category. And then, this is kind of the way that relations work in a reciprocal way. Within the months, you could actually open up the month and filter the interlinked databases by category in various ways. So you can find the method that works best for you, but that's really about using relations and interlinked databases to make these different comparisons, and not necessarily about rollups. So hopefully that's helpful. And also, as you do that, you'll want to be sure, instead of having to create those inner databases each time, be sure to use the template feature for databases. And you can create what's called a self-referencing filter, so that when you create that linked database within the template, you can choose the template name itself. And when you implement the template, when you create a new item with the template, it'll be automatically filtered for the new item. So if you have an expense category template, for example, and you want to create a new category, let's say like dining, if you implement the template and it uses that self-referencing filter, and you name that new category dining, then the inner databases will be automatically filtered for dining. You won't have to create that each time or configure the filter each time. So that's getting into a whole nother territory. There's plenty of other content out there that explains how to do that. And if you're curious about it or have any specific questions, again, you can tweet at me and I'll be happy to help guide you on that. So another question, could you give us an example of a workaround for a rollup of a rollup? Yeah, let me try to do that quickly, because that is important. Oftentimes you will want to roll up a rollup. So basically the way to do that is, we already kind of have the need for it in this year example. Like, for example, in our years database, we couldn't automatically create an expenses total by with a simple roll up like we did with months and categories, because if we tried to do that, we would be rolling up a roll up. So basically what we want to do here is, if we have total expenses by month, if we also want total expenses by year, what we would want to do is roll up the totals for each related month for each year. Hopefully that makes sense. So basically what we want to do here is we want to total the expenses, or total the total for each related month. So if we choose the months relation, what we would want to do is choose total here, because that is the rollup property within this database. But unfortunately, we can't roll up a rollup. So what you can do, and I'm glad you asked that question. What you can do is just create a total in a different format. You could just call it like formula, and then create a formula, make it a formula property, and then just make a reference to that total property. That's going to return a number. So you can see here where we have contents here, it's just reflecting the value of that rollup property. So we could just hide this. You could just never look at it. And what you can do then is you can roll up that total formula property, and that's going to give you what you want in kind of the grandparent level of this relationship. So then you can sum, and there you go. And then, how you format it is a whole nother story, but that's just a quick and dirty workaround for rolling up a rollup. Basically, you just create a formula property within the retrieved database that just reflects whatever rollup property you want to roll up. So I know that's a lot of lingo, but hopefully that makes sense to you. And maybe it's helpful to create a video specific to rolling up a rollup. Let me know if that would be helpful, but hopefully that gives you the gist. Alrighty. So then, hey, Natasha, what's your workaround for a number rollup property, now a text field that you want to use in a formula in a new table? Oh, okay. I got you. I was one step ahead of you there, Natasha, but thank you so much for asking that as well, because I'm glad I got an opportunity to explain that at a high level. Good stuff here. Anything else? Thank you, Esteban, for posting the Notion VIP article, because that leads to the template that everybody can get their hands on for practicing all this stuff. And if you again, if you need me to enhance any of that using these rollup of a rollup examples or anything, you just let me know. And I am always happy to help guide you as you become familiar with rollups and these other elements of Notion. So if there are no other questions, now we're right at that half-hour mark, which works out perfectly. I will follow up with some resources, and before our next edition of Notion at Work here, please feel free to let us know what you'd like to learn about. We always let those recommendations drive our planning. And in the interim, everyone, please enjoy a very happy holiday. And if you encounter any obstacles in your tinkering with Notion, you know where to find me. Thank you all so much.